Okay, just picture this for a second. You walk into your home, you look up, and there it is. That dark, ugly stain spreading across your ceiling. It's a total nightmare for any homeowner, right? But the real headache isn't just fixing the damage, it's figuring out who's actually responsible. We're going to dive into one specific case where that very question turned into a huge legal fight.
It seems like such a simple question, doesn't it? But, the answer can be so complicated. For one homeowner, a woman named Ronna Biesecker, this wasn't just some hypothetical problem. It was the beginning of a really long and frustrating journey.
So our story is all about Ronna Biesecker, who owned a condominium, Unit A113. And for her, what started as a small leak turned into a persistent problem that just would not go away.
And we're not talking about just a little drip here. In January of 2019, the first leak shows up. Just a month later, it's back, but this time there are cracks in the plaster. So they pay for repairs, but by November, you can probably guess what happened. The leak was back, in the exact same spot. I mean, can you just imagine how frustrating that would be?
So Ms. Biesecker is totally fed up, and she starts looking for answers. And she finds what she thinks is the smoking gun. These little cracks in the building's exterior stucco wall. For her, it was a total aha moment. It seemed obvious. This had to be where the water was getting in. And that one idea, it became the entire foundation for a case against the Homeowners Association.
All right, so with a prime suspect in mind, the stucco, Ms. Biesecker does exactly what you're supposed to do. She calls in the experts to prove her theory was right. So let's play detective here and follow this evidence trail to see what they actually found. And listen, she was really thorough about it. She brought in a door company, a handyman service, and an inspector. But here's the million-dollar question. Did the evidence from her own experts actually back up her theory about the stucco?
Okay, so this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. The very first expert she hires, from a door company, takes a look and immediately points the finger, but not at the stucco. He points up, to the unit directly above hers. He thought the leak was coming from gaps under her upstairs neighbor's sliding door.
So, next up, a handyman comes in to patch up the plaster. And what's their diagnosis? Well, they also concluded the damage was from an old leak coming from above. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Because it's getting pretty hard to ignore.
And then, finally, after another leak, an inspector gives the final word. The verdict? It's unanimous. The water was coming from the upstairs unit's sliding doors. So that's 3 different experts, all hired by Ms. Biesecker, and they are all telling her the exact same thing.
And yet, and this is the crazy part, despite what all of her own experts were saying, Ms. Biesecker stuck to her guns. She was completely convinced it was the stucco. So, believing the HOA was responsible, she filed a formal petition, and this whole thing officially turned into a legal battle.
So, this slide really breaks down the whole fight. On one side, you have Ms. Biesecker's claim. The leak is from the stucco, which is a common element that the HOA has to fix. And on the other side, you have the HOA's defense. Look, all the evidence says it's the upstairs door, which is part of a private unit, and that's not our problem.
Now, the whole case really hinges on this legal term, common elements. Just think of it as anything that all the owners in the building share. You know, the foundation, the roof, and yes, the exterior stucco walls. The HOA is legally on the hook for maintaining all of these shared parts.
And this chart makes it super simple. The HOA handles the common elements. The individual unit owner, well, they're responsible for everything inside their own unit, including things like their windows and sliding doors. Ms. Biesecker's entire case came down to proving that the source of the leak was on the HOA side of this chart.
So, the arguments were made, all the evidence was on the table, and the whole thing landed in front of a judge. Let's get to the moment of truth and see how this all played out.
But before we get to the final word, we have to talk about a super important legal idea. The burden of proof. Basically, this means that the person who is making the claim, in this case Ms. Biesecker, has the job of proving their story is true. It wasn't the HOA's job to prove they were innocent, it was her job to prove they were at fault.
So, how much proof did she need? The standard is called preponderance of the evidence. It's not like what you see in a criminal trial on TV. You just have to show that your claim is more likely true than not. Think of it like the scales of justice. You just need to tip them, even just a tiny bit, in your favor.
And here it is, the verdict. The judge found that Ms. Biesecker did not meet her burden of proof. When all the evidence was weighed, she just couldn't tip those scales in her favor.
And this is the truly wild part of this entire case. The key piece of evidence that completely sank her claim came from the experts that she herself had hired. Her own evidence ended up being the best argument for the HOA's defense. In a bizarre twist, she basically proved her opponent's case for them.
So, the case was dismissed. But this story is about more than just one leaky ceiling. It's got some really powerful lessons for any homeowner, especially if you live in a community with an HOA. Let's break down the big takeaways here.
So what can we really learn from all this? First, your gut feeling, no matter how strong it is not evidence in a courtroom. Second, you have to listen to the experts, even when they're telling you something you really don't want to hear. It also shows just how important it is to know the rules of your own HOA. And finally, it's a huge reminder that if you're the one making an accusation, the pressure is on you to prove it.
When you boil this whole case down, it really just comes back to one simple number: 3. 3 expert opinions, all hired by Ms. Biesecker, and every single one of them pointed away from her claim. At the end of the day, that was the evidence that mattered most.
And that really leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. It's not just about what other evidence she could have found, but maybe why she couldn't see the evidence she already had. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we let our own beliefs blind us to the facts that are sitting right there in front of us?